clock. I normally... Oh, there he goes.
There we go. Take it away, Joe.
Hi. Right. So welcome, everybody. We're really delighted to have Guy with us today on this glorious sunny day. So thank you for spending the time with us, Guy. It's really appreciated. Obviously, me and I should know you, but there'll be a lot of people out there that will not. So maybe tell us a bit about yourself and how you the solution focus, how you got into solution focused way of working.
Okay, thank you. Well, just to say first, thanks very much for the invitation to do this. I've never been live on Facebook before, and there's lots of firsts happening in this strange time that we're all in. So I really appreciate the chance to talk with you, and I really love your organisation and the openness of your organisation and the group you have on Facebook. And so yeah, it's good to be here. I first started using solution focused practice. You could say I first started using it knowingly or having been trained in it about 25 years ago. And at that time, I was a social worker. So I actually got qualified as a social worker over 30 years ago, which just seems crazy to me. And so I was working in mainstream social work. I was working for social services, and I was working with children and families. So when I first qualified, it was a generic job in theory. And then in the early 1990s, we split into adults and children. And I was working with children and doing child protection and working with children in care and the mainstream social services work. And I was looking to do something different. I was looking to work more therapeutically. I was trying to find spaces within my social work job to help people and to work therapeutically. And it seems to me that all the social workers I know, like me, you go into it to wanting to help people. And yet when I was qualified as a social worker and working in social services, it started to become apparent that it wasn't easy to help people. That might sound odd, but the job was a bit different than that. And so one thing I did was to get a job working for a duty team. So it was like the first port of call. This was up in Derby in the Midlands, and so we were the first place where people contacted either if they had a concern about a child or if somebody in a family wanted help. So that seemed to me the place where you could most likely offer help, and I was working in that context when I went. I actually tried to get a job as a social work lecturer, and I was in my early 30s and I wasn't quite ready for it really, and I got a few interviews but didn't get a job. So I was thinking, well, what on earth to do? And I saw this advert for this training course by Brief. I was lucky enough to go on a 4-day training course with Chris Iverson at Brief. This is 25 years ago. And while I was working as a social worker on duty, the first port of call for concerns or issues about children and families. And I found that this was an approach that I could use in parts of my job straight away. And other sort of therapeutic approaches were hard to fit into the social work sort of task or my role. And I couldn't use this in all of my role. When I was presented with concerns about a child and we had to assess the risk to a child, and it wasn't immediately obvious how to use solution focus. Although the approach called the science of safety was being developed in Australia, actually, while I was first trained in solution focus. And that was a solution focused sort of orientated or influenced way of doing child protection work. But the place I did solution focus was when parents were coming to the department asking for help. And we didn't really offer a very good service, I don't think, in that we were very geared toward child protection. It seemed to me that the time to really do everything you possibly can is when a parent is asking for help.
Yeah.
And the solution-focused approach just fitted. It gave me a model or an approach, a way of working from the late 1995 onwards that seemed to fit. And so it was, a minority of my work time, but a really important part of my work time when I sort of developed these skills in solution-focused work with colleagues who became very interested because I started to enjoy what I was doing. It's a very positive way of working with families. And so my colleagues were sort of looking a bit curiously at me, like, what the hell's gone? Guy's actually enjoying himself. What's he on? Yeah. And I also had a very supportive manager. It's okay to do a few plugs. So if people want to read about this, I actually wrote a paper called Miracles Can Happen, Maybe we'll talk about the miracle question in a bit, but that's been an important question in the history of solution focus, this miracle question. So miracles can happen. I could help families in a social services department back in the mid-90s. And one thing that helped that to happen was that I had a very supportive manager. I always say to professionals, whether it's social workers or others, if you want to develop a new way of working or a new service, make sure you get a good manager, because that's really, because you need that support. You need to find ways to support anyway. And my colleagues became interested. And so at first, I was just using this approach individually with individual families. And then when colleagues became interested, we actually set up a sort of weekly surgery where we offered we offered solution-focused meetings to families who were asking for help, who were struggling with whatever, relationships in the family or stress and et cetera, et cetera. And we worked as a team. So there'd be two of us or three of us working together with a family. And so as workers, we were able to support each other's skill development. And that's when it really took off for me. That was about 1997, 98. So when I first used the approach, I was a social worker, supported by a good manager, and then a team. And the team approach is really useful. So really important to be in a team where people are excited and curious about something together, and learn together. And we were working with families together. So that was when I first developed some focused sort of skills or stuff.
And I think you're right. If the manager's on board, and it helps so much, because it's being in that social work field, that obviously there are families that come forward for support, and there are families that are basically mandated. I suppose was it difficult to keep that in mind when you're doing solution focused work as a social worker?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if it was difficult, but that's an important distinction you just draw between families that came forward and the sort of mandated side. And in order to create the weekly surgery that I just mentioned, and we called it the Reception Family Intervention Team, and we did that so we could give it a short name. So it was REFIT for short.
Right, cool.
And to create that, I realised that there was you could separate or divide the referrals, the sort of jargony words that we use, these referrals that we received, into two groups. One where it was like a third party referral. I mean, somebody was referring about a family, whether it was a health or a teacher or a neighbour or someone was, and that was typically a concern, and you'd sort of go down a child protection route. I mean, later there was other procedures when children in need and safeguarding came in, but that was the child protection route, basically checking out, and investigating and assessing. And then the other group of referrals was actually somebody who's coming asking for help, and typically, it could be a child, an older child, but typically it would be a parent or carer asking for help. And so it was a second group, because we had the procedures for the first group. I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying we got that right at all, but we had a very, very clear child protection procedures. It was very, very clear what we should be doing if you follow procedures. But the parents that were coming asking for help, this is what I think I said it a few minutes ago. I don't think they got as good a deal really, because we didn't have the same sort of procedures or attention given to it. So I think we gave it attention, and we thought this is really important. People are asking for help. This is the place where the most constructive sort of involvement can happen. So that was the division we made. So the solution focused approach was being, the word you used, Joe, the parents who were coming forward. It was that good. And actually we found that as we were developing our skills in the approach, and the ways that you ask certain questions, they were starting to influence what we were doing with the other group of referrals that came to us. Just a simple example, and this could sort of lead into the sort of conversations that families can have at home, that can be useful. These questions that get labelled in the solution-focused literature coping questions. Unfortunate names, which I'll mention in a moment, but very powerful questions. Someone's going through a tough time, and in the sort of classic counselling role, you'd listen and you'd empathise and you'd acknowledge, and you're going through a very tough time, and you'd reflect back. And in solution-focused, you'd be curious beyond that, and you'd add a question onto the to the reflection. How are you managing to keep going? You know, how are you getting through that? And because I realised that question became applicable all across the board. You know, not just with that one group of families. So when I had a child protection involvement, and I had a duty to sort of investigate and assess. And, you know, obviously the families we were meeting were going through tough times, and across the board. And that question always or often fitted. You know, what are you doing that's helping to keep going? Just to say that they are called coping questions in the books. You know, about this approach. And when I first started using it, I was saying, that sounds tough. How are you coping? Yeah. And I sort of learned not to use that word, because lots of parents would say to me, look, what are you talking about? I'm not coping. You know, are you not listening to what I'm telling you? You know, so something about the word cope didn't really work. And that's important, that people, because parents and others, need to feel listened to. And so when I'm sort of, you know, teaching the approach, which I do a lot of these days, and I teach about these really useful, powerful questions. And I mentioned that they're called coping questions. So if you read about the approach, that's what you'll read, coping questions. But I encourage people, maybe don't use the word cope, because it doesn't really, I'm not coping, you know, but so how are you managing to get through the day, you know, and how are you managing to get up in the So the questions that we sort of learned by working with the groups of parents who came forward, I think we started to be able to use those questions more widely. And the mindset that you develop, you know, that people are doing their best, and people are managing something, and that people have got resources, and that's everybody. That's not just the parents that come forward.
Absolutely,
you know? Yeah. So the mindset you develop starts to sort of affect everything you do. You know, or hope, you know, if you're in child protection or wherever you're working.
So what are you up to now then? Sorry, Joe.
Well, so all those years ago, I mean, I was lucky. I got a job in Leicester for the Family Service Unit in the late 90s, and it was setting up and running and coordinating and doing a lot of the sessions in a therapeutic service for families called the Early Response Project. Another very important aspect, I think, early intervention, I think, has criticism as a concept, and early intervention, I think, can mean working with children very young. The early response project in this example meant as soon as possible after someone's asked for help, you know. And this project was set up, it was part of a whole raft of attempted things to try and reduce waiting lists to child mental health services. And so you know, the optimum time, it seems to me, to work with someone is when they're asking for help, you know, not like a month later or 3 months later or a week later, but like as soon as possible. So the early response project was the late 90s, early 2000s. And while I was doing that, I started to run training courses. So just coming back to your question, Aisha, so I've started to become a solution-focused trainer. So what I've done for quite a few years now is a mixture of training, teaching professionals and others how to use solution-focused ideas, and using it myself. I had a sort of little detour, strangely it seems to me, but a very exciting detour, to being the chair of the British Association of Social Workers.
Yes.
For 4 years until 2 years ago. And then in the past 2 years, I'm sort of back sort of full-time in my solution-focused world. And I'm involved in a couple of, I think, really exciting projects. What one's not a solution-focused project as such, but very much about working with families. That's the Reframe Collective. And then I'm involved, they're both, and the other one's called the Solution Focus Collective. So that's sort of two projects I'm involved in at the moment, as well as, you know, seeing people using solution as a practitioner, a coach or therapist, and then training. So that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Can you, are you allowed to say anything more about these two exciting new projects?
Absolutely,
not because we're curious about it.
No. We don't want to nick your ideas or anything.
Yeah, no.
I'm just going to write all this down.
Yeah, write it down, Joe. Write it down.
No, I'm going to make myself stop now and again, because I'm in danger of sort of rambling and just making sure that I sort of give you a chance to keep me on track a bit here. But
don't worry, I'm in charge of keeping you both on track.
Okay. Let me take a breath. And I mean, I know you very kindly put I can see the website address going underneath there, and so they're both mentioned on the website. I've got a set of pages under the heading Community, actually, and both the Solution Focus Collective and the Reframe Collective come under the Community pages on my website. So to sort of make some general comments about it, about them and this idea of community. Because solution focused, originally started was developed by therapists in the States, in Milwaukee, in the United States, and psychotherapists, family therapists, and typically therapy is a sort of private endeavor where in a private room somewhere, an individual works with another individual, or sometimes with a family if it's family therapy. And so that's still part of what I do. I'm working with individuals occasionally these days. I used to work almost entirely with families, and now that's occasionally, but they're individual families. So the community thing is me and a bunch of other people in the solution focus world, and this is really thinking about the Solution Focus Collective in particular. I was just thinking about widening our thinking and practice. So looking at wider change, social change, not simply individual change. So there's changes. So a family, a parent who's struggling, that could be individually just really, it's not about them as an individual, and it's the structures around them, that perhaps need changing, not them as an individual.
Yeah.
So, this has been part of social work. It was part of social work at its very beginnings, over 100 years ago. And it sort of died away a little bit in social work, the idea that social reform, social change is part of what is done. It's all been focused on the individual. So within our solution focus world, a number of us are sort of it's fairly beginning stages, sort of looking at how could the solution focused approach, which I don't think we've talked much about, apart from those coping questions I mentioned. The solution focused approach, looking at what's working already, or looking at the futures that people want for them, people's hopes, and the futures that people preferred future if people's hopes were realised. So that future focus, the resource focus, the focus on what's working, and utilising those focuses and that way of thinking about change with wider change. And so the Solution Focus Collective is we're thinking about that. I wrote an article with a guy called Mark Gardiner. Mark works for and is part of a workers' co-op in the southwest, based around Plymouth and Devon, called the Zebra Collective. There's a link to it on the community page on my website. They're already doing this. I sort of didn't discover them until about a year or 2 years ago. And so Mark and colleagues are part of Solution Focus Collective, but they're sort of doing community development work, and other sort of wider sort of focused work, in particularly in Devon and Cornwall, with Solution Focus being sort of running through everything they do. So, and then else, so there are people doing this. There's Steve Freeman. It's worth check out the Stoke Community of Practice, and there's an organisation called Voices of Stoke, who work with people with multiple needs. And connected with the Voices of Stoke is Expert Citizens. And I would just recommend anyone who's watching this, check these people out. They're doing amazing work, running communities of practice in a solution-focused way. So there are sort of pockets of work developing, and I guess the Solution Focused Collective is trying to promote these ideas and just and amplify them, or make them, to increase them. The Reframe Collective is different, and I was again very fortunate to sort of be able to get involved in this. It's a group of parents, birth parents, psychologists, social workers, social work academics in terms of the trustees, as well as the steering group involved. And there's a website, it's linked to on my website, reframecollective.co.uk. And it's the vision is sort of stated there. I want really believing that the child protection system and the system for working with and supporting families needs transforming, really. And maybe that's become apparent that I've been thinking that in what I said about how how social work was for me back in the 90s. And
So who can access this? Who can access these projects?
Well, we've just set up I'm just thinking of the most useful ways in. If you look at the website, there's an excellent sort of blog post that Barbara wrote psychologist involved in Reframe Collective, which sort of talks about the present situation, actually, of COVID and the situation facing parents involved with social care, parents who have had social care involvement, had to have social work involvement, maybe have had children removed from their care, or have currently got social care involved. And so there was a really, I think, excellent thing that Barbara put in this blog post about this whole thing that we're talking about, unprecedented times with COVID. Times for parents who've been in that situation, always difficult and unprecedented. But a couple of things we're doing at the moment is we've created a Facebook group, which is, so if you just look at parents who are in this situation, or have been in the situation, just look at Reframe Collective, and you'll search for the group. And if you're, if you've had social care involvement or have at the moment, and you're looking for support, the Facebook group could well be supportive for you. We're also offering to parents in the same situation, online support group every Monday. So while lockdown is happening, and you can email admin@reframecollective.co.uk to find out details about that every Monday from 4 till 5. So it's a new project, a new collective, and it's both about offering services like that, support, but also looking to change the system. So looking to transform, and sort of professionals, allies of parents, working together, to do that. And so that it's not a solution focused project. Of course, my involvement, that's something I bring to it, but very much. I mean, it is solution focused in the sense that having a belief in family strengths and the ability of parents to support each other. So
I know you keep saying it's not the solution focused project, but I don't think you can help but make it solution focused any way that you possibly can, because it is working in collaboration, isn't it?
I wouldn't want to sort of make claims, or it's it would happen anyway. It's happened. It's not. I mean, but what's, I think the most important thing about it, and that the Facebook group, it's about parents working with each other and supporting each other. This is about, as opposed to professionals doing that. And that, to me, the mindset to me of solution focused is that professionals haven't got the answers. And as our job. What we try and do, I suppose, when you're using the approach as a professional, is to ask questions, just to help people unlock their own resources, and describe the futures that they want for themselves in ways that can generate hope. So the future focus and the resource focus, but but no focus on professionals coming up with answers. For people. And
it'll be great. It sounds really brilliant, because parents who are maybe in the system and are looking for, a mutual support, would be a really good resource for them.
Okay.
And in terms of obviously with the current situation and families being at home, I mean, we're kind of doing Zoom calls, and generally speaking, most of them are. In fact, the vast majority seem to be getting on with it really well. And obviously there are times when it's not so good. But talking, I mean, for anyone listening who doesn't know what the solution focused way of working is in a nutshell, so that they can understand it, and then maybe we can go on to what sort of conversations they can have with each other.
What should I say a bit about that now?
Because I don't know if everyone listening will know what the solution focused approach is.
Well, it's interesting. But I've been thinking, before we started today, about the sort of the difference, or what's the most fundamental aspect of it, and maybe also what's different for parents or family who want to think about, talking with each other or in solution focused ways, and what's different about that than maybe me if I was seeing a family and sort of having like a therapy session. I think there's different things, and I think what maybe is most fundamental about it is what you pay attention to. And so, a solution focus. So if you're being solution focused, I think you're paying attention to what's working, and you're doing something called listening with a constructive ear. So I mean, just in terms of how the approach developed originally, there were therapists working with people that came with problems, and so the starting point of therapy traditionally was, well, tell us about the problem. What's happening with the problem, and what sort of happened in part was that the therapist started to notice there are always exceptions to the problem. Something, so there was somebody who was feeling depressed, on some days they felt a little bit better, or maybe not quite as bad. And so they had this amazing idea, which is incredibly simple, really, but revolutionary, to start asking about the exceptions and about the problems. So when I say it's fundamentally, I think about what you pay attention to. I think any period of time that anyone lives through, anyone, any family, any parent, anyone watching this, if you think back over the past week, there will have been ups and downs. Think back over the past day, maybe there will have been ups and downs. And maybe especially when we're struggling, the downs seem to just become more noticeable to us. It's what we pay attention to. So I think fundamentally in Solution Focus, we're trying to pay attention to the ups, or the times when it's less down, so noticing when you sort of woke up one morning feeling not quite as bad, or if someone's struggling at home, well, so when were you last feeling a bit better than this? What about yesterday? How was it yesterday? Because the difference in a conversation in a family, if that's a parent, asking a child that question, they'll have some idea anyway, because they'll have been around yesterday as well, and they might be able to say, were things a bit better yesterday? I might be wrong about that, but were you feeling? Yeah. What were you doing yesterday? And that's one aspect of it. Paying attention to the times that are better, or not quite as bad, and noticing those times, just asking people questions about those times, and looking out for good stuff. Again, slightly different, I think, than doing it as a therapist, doing it at home as part of a family. There's a wonderful GP that I know called David Unwin from Southport, and I want to interview David about him using the solution-focused approach as a doctor, as a GP, people coming for like 10-minute consultations. And one thing that he said that's never left me, that I think could be applicable in a family situation as well, he says, in every consultation he does, he'll try and give a compliment, and he'll look out for someone looking a bit better. And if someone looks a bit better, he might say to them, you're looking a little bit better. Am I right about that? And if they say, well, yeah, I suppose I am a bit better, and say, so, and this is the crucial bit. How did you get that to happen? What have you done to help you to get better? So I suppose it's paying attention to the good stuff, paying attention to the exceptions to the problem, asking about those times, and then asking people, how did you do that? What are you doing? So when you're spending time with each other, you have got these opportunities to notice when anyone looks better, anyone's more cheerful, or anyone's done something nice, and they could be sort of complimented or ask questions about that.
No, that's brilliant. That kind of sums it up. And like you say, noticing the times when things are even a slightly bit better, and what people were doing to make that happen, and kind of how we can do more of it.
And it might sound a bit technical, because I don't know about using sort of solution-focused techniques at home, but some families do, and families that I've worked with, and you'll know about scaling questions. And it's a simple idea, and some parents sort of grabbed hold of it. And one of the great things about scaling questions, using 0 to 10 scales, is that it sort of cuts across this idea that things are either bad or good. Things are awful now, they're terrible, and people think, we all think in this either things are good or they're bad, and the scale says everything's always in between the two somewhere. And so asking someone, well, if 10 is, this is the best day it could be for you at the moment, and 0 was, where are you? Well, I'm about a 2, and 2 is not brilliant. So at that moment, I wouldn't be saying, hey, wow, fantastic, you're at a 2. It's quite low down the scale, isn't it? So you have to sort of be a bit careful, respectful about, okay, you're at a 2, so, and you might say something like, well, I guess I'm sure you want to be higher up the scale than that, but I'm also noticing that 2 is higher up than 0. You know, so what's better than 0 at the moment, even though it's 2? So you've got to acknowledge that things aren't brilliant, and at the same time they're 2 and not 0.
Yeah.
And so as you'll know, loads of people love these questions because they're so bloody good. And I've had parents say to me, "We've been using their scaling questions," and I ask my child, "Where are you on the scale today?" So that's something that can be used, I think.
Yeah, and it helps them take. I mean, a lot of our parents do use scales at home.
Yeah,
because they kind of adopted that way of using that language. Really, where are you on the scale now, and what can we do to get you to the next number up? How come you're not lower? Blah blah blah. And they really appreciate it, especially the kids that are that have got anxiety at the moment about returning to school or the whole COVID situation. Scales are such a brilliant tool to use, and it's so easy, and it's universal.
Yeah.
If whether you're autistic or ADHD or it's just numbers.
And when we arranged this conversation, Aisha, you sort of mentioned the solution, the NSPCC Solution Focused Toolkit, which is easily available. Probably you got a link to it on your group. I don't know, but there's loads of lovely ideas on that about alternatives to these 0 to 10 numbers, like drawing ladders and climbing up hills and things for younger, because that toolkit's great for ideas of using this stuff with younger children. So they make a lot of sense, these ideas. I just thought,
go on. No, sorry, go on, Guy.
Well, when you said, Aisha, about that people are anxious, about anxiety is a sort of future focused thing, isn't it? And I'm anxious about what's going to happen next week or going back to school or whatever it is. How am I going to cope with this? And what jumped into my head was anxiety is a sort of a problem focused thought about the future, and that's where the future focused part of the approach could come in useful. And even if it could just be a very small, I can, I understand that you're anxious about that, and it could be suppose you handle it really well, or you'd have to adapt these questions to the age of whoever you're talking to, but just imagine that you do a good job. Imagine that you do better than you think you're going to do. That's something that's always a possibility, I think, if someone's anxious about how something's going to go. Suppose you do even better than you think you might. What would be different? How would you know? If you were the best you, in that situation, what would you be doing? What would I notice about you, or what would your sister notice about you, or that sort of your best friend? What would your best friend notice if you were doing the best you possibly could?
How would they know that you were handling it a lot better than you actually think?
I think if anxiety is around, these could be useful questions.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
I was going to say, even with younger children, we can just say, in terms of how happy you are on a scale of 1 to 10, because young people understand the word happy. They might not understand anxiety or immense worries. So just would make you a little bit happier on the scale. Where would you need to be, and how can we support you with that? So the conversations that families can have around the scaling is such a versatile tool, isn't it? Because you can scale almost anything.
You can. You're exactly right, Joe. It's simple ideas about how happy you're feeling, how happy, really good to use, and you could do could you do a happiness sort of glass of water, or fill it up with how happy you are, and if there was more going in, what would be different then? Well, things like that.
And I'm gonna steal that one.
That's a good one.
Just letting you know, I'm gonna steal that one. I'm an honest thief.
At least she lets you know.
The first person I think I saw talking about using liquid in a container like that was somebody called Di O'Neill from the St. Luke's Centre in Australia. I think the St. Luke's Resources Centre. I don't know if they're still going, but I would recommend people Googling them. You might have heard of strengths cards.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, the St. Luke's Centre in Australia invented created a lot of this stuff. I think the first strengths cards, which are brilliant, came from them. So there's me. So it wasn't my idea. The water in the glass. St. Luke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like we were saying, even when I speak to families, I always kind of another favourite of mine is what have you been pleased to notice about yourself today or during the past week, and it's amazing. They may struggle at first because, but when you pick something, so even if it's we did the Lego challenge today. So wow, how did you manage to do that? What did it take to be good at that? And it's a lovely thing to remind ourselves that, like you were saying, in terms of focusing on the good. So what are you pleased to notice about today that that you were really pleased with? Because sometimes they can go missed. They can be missed.
Yeah. And it's a lovely sign to show what you're interested in, by asking things,
yeah,
I just
and
think, sort of making it realistic at the end of the day, Like we used to say our prayers at night with my dad, but I just, the idea of asking every night, what have you been pleased to know today? It's like people do gratitude at the end of the day, don't they? And things they're grateful for. So translating that in asking your children. Yeah.
So again, it's being positively curious, isn't it? And which is absolutely brilliant, because I find, when especially when parents pick up their kids from school, how was your day? And you usually get the negatives. What I do for my daughter, but as soon as I ask her to scale it, and then tell me, say something that's going to put a smile on my face. What was your moment of brilliance today?
And
at first, that was such a weird question to her. And now, if obviously she's not at school now, but I'm at work, so when I go home, I will ask, what was your moment of brilliance today? And she expects it, and it's lovely because it builds on such a beautiful conversation afterwards.
Okay, so she expects it.
She does. Well, for the first 2 weeks, she thought I was going cuckoo.
So you had to be consistent.
Yeah.
The approach.
Absolutely. But being positively curious is amazing. To find out what they did really, really well, and actually sitting back and watching your children and then asking, how did you manage to do that? That's incredible. Are just basic conversations that parents can have, rather than that's really good, great, and walking away. But actually, that's kind of a full stop. But building resilience is important. I mean, solution focus is a very good way of building resilience. So how do we build resilience, guys? See, did you see what I do? I create a scenario, and then I leave you two to answer the question. How are we building resilience using solution focused tools or methods?
Well, okay. Well, I'll share one thought, then I'll hand over to Joe. Then but you've got there all. I mean, my starting point would be people have already got resilience, or people already do things that people think is resilient. I'm not always sure what resilience is really, but I mean, people already will be doing things, So I think you're building resilience in your daughter by asking those questions at the end of each school day, So helping people recognise what they do that works already, and then use a scale. And if tomorrow, if people want to be able to do more of that sort of thing, if tomorrow you were a little bit higher up the scale, what would be different? What else would you notice? Maybe not what would be different, but what else would you notice yourself doing? So I think so when you're moving up the scale, it might be nice for children to add to what they're doing already, rather than what would be different. That suggests you've got to change what you're doing, but just to do more things. So I would start with the idea that people are already resilient, and build from there.
And I think those scaling questions often remind our clients of that actually I am doing things really well. And the more conversations we have with families, so for example, I got a family where he's a 9-year-old boy, and I let him run the session. So he scales himself, he scales his grandparents, he scales his mum. Where are you on the scale? How come we're there? What are we doing that's well? And what would bring us to the next point up? So it's a lovely way of them having those conversations where we don't need to be there. It's very empowering.
That's
so
fantastic.
that in itself builds some resilience. He's great. I mean, I just sit there and let him run the show because
lovely deal. Yeah. So your work, you're both using solution focused practice with families, and you're helping them to learn how to use it themselves.
Yeah.
You're teaching people to use it in effect. Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah. I don't think the organisations doing that, are they?
I think I'm not sure. I think it's really important for them to learn the process, so they're able to cope with setbacks and they're able to resolve challenges, because we're always going to have challenges. And the one thing we don't want our families to do is to always be reliant on services. Obviously, when they need it, all the services are there. But actually, to help them solve their own challenges, their own issues. I don't really like that word, but their own issues is very empowering. You've got to be quite flexible in your approach with the families to see who has what skill, and let's run with it. Let them take the sessions.
I suppose a couple of thoughts occurred to me. One is that every family is unique, and so they'll have, everyone will have their own ways of. So it's hard to prescribe how a family should, what they should do, even if they should use solution focused or how they should use it. People will perhaps find their own ways of using it, and also because if there are people out there watching, there'll be people very new to this approach, and just to be sure, just to be careful that it's not come across that you don't let people talk about their problems, because sometimes people will be upset, people have got difficult problems, people need to share things either at home with people in their family or outside the family, and people have got to have a chance to do that, and if people feel bad, people have got to be able to, and everything's got to be listened to, and not just listening to. So I think saying paying attention to the better times, you've got to listen to everything, and when people need to sort of let you know how bad they feel and upset, and they need to be comforted, then that you've got to do that, So
and the question, and what you were saying earlier, Guy, about how are you managing to get through the day when things are so bad? It's those sorts of questions bring out hidden strengths that people don't so often realize that they have. So that's a really,
especially when you're persistent with them, which may be easier in the therapy room than at home. I think there's this sort of idea that you keep asking, and sometimes it can almost be uncomfortable. I don't know if that's what we want it to be, but it can be difficult, because when you're in a sort of therapy session, a lot of hard thinking can be involved. And maybe at times at home, there's conversations which do require hard thinking. There's a different context, isn't it, being at home than being in a therapy session. So I'll just be, you need to think about that a little bit.
It's just looking at the language that parents can use at home. So
that could be simple as well.
So it could be just like even better if. For a piece of homework. And if my daughter's done a piece of homework and I think can be improved, instead of me saying, well, actually, you left this out, this out, this out, this out. As a parent, what I say is, even better if you are able to do, and then I'll scale her homework. I think that's a 6. What do you need to do to get yourself to a 7? Because that's empowering for her. She needs to be independently thinking rather than me keep giving her the answers. I'm there to support. So that's what we're trying to encourage the parents to do, is kind of tweak that language that they're using, so it's not problem focused. Because as we know, kids don't really respond to that, and neither do I.
I really like the even better if. I sort of I do a little bit of work with some medical students with a wonderful GP called George Farrelly, and me and George is part of graduate medical students sort of it's a module called Medicine in Society, and we do every fortnight. We were doing until this got in the way, this current situation, a sort of day in the GP surgery with 7 medical students, and George is really keen on continuous improvement. which I think is connected with scaling and solution focus. And so at the end of each session, we encourage the students to give feedback about us and it's what went well, and then EBI, even better if. So what happened today if it was even better? So these things translate all over the place. A parent with a child, or a medical student with a couple of tutors. So these ideas are very flexible.
Yeah, I mean, we use it for our own practice all the time. So if I've, I scale myself usually after each session with a family, as a practitioner, not how the session went, as a practitioner, how well did I do? So then I can improve myself. And, if the session was rubbish, that's because I was a really bad practitioner. It's not because of the family, it was me.
No, I think solution focus does this. It does encourage workers to take responsibility. Not blame the service user or the client. If there's no progress, it's like, well, what do I need to do as a worker? To sort of to better fit or better help. I'm sure I once read that Arsene Wenger, the former Arsenal manager, did ask each of his players.
Sorry,
a bit risky in football, especially to London people from North London who might be the opposite side. But I once read that he, after every match, he would ask each of his players to rate their performance, for the player to rate it between 0 and 10, and then what would be different if 1 point higher.
No.
This is when I worked at Brief. There's Chris, the people that trained me in how to do this, and I read that, and I said we should try and invite Arsene Wenger to come and be a speaker at one of our speakers. I think we wouldn't have been able to afford the fee, I don't think. But
no one would turn up anyway, Guy.
No. Just to show flexibility.
And I mean I think the beauty with the scale as well is when you're saying often one of the criticisms is that, well, it's just looking at positives. What about all the things that are not going so well? But I think the scaling is the other way. So when you ask, when you're 1 point up the scale, what would be different? It's kind of almost dealing with that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, very much.
Because it's often criticised as being sort of, just under the surface. And you're right when you say about we have to listen to the problem. We can't just, cut them off and say, right, so, if things were different, because people need to feel heard.
They do.
And so it's otherwise we may miss things that are important.
This is true. And in a therapy situation or a coaching or my starting point, our starting point, what are your best hopes from this work, from our work together? And then the focus needs to be around the person, whoever the person or people are that one is working with. It's their hopes that are at the centre. And so hopefully that means that you don't miss something important because you're working with their best hopes from the work. And I was just thinking, we're talking about how individual families can have conversations and how we can work with individuals and families. Going back to the Reframe Collective and the vision or its mission to help to transform the system. If we sort of engage in a process of let's try and describe, if the child protection system, or better put, if the system of working with families was the best it could be, and if families perceived it as helpful, if it was a supportive system, if it was, what would it be like? And let's try and describe that system. So that's, as you know, very much a solution-focused process. This description of a preferred future for the whole system. And just inviting that description, asking that question, implicitly is saying there's a problem with how it is at the moment, because that's why we want to describe how we want it to be. So even asking people what their hopes are, and then to describe their preferred future, in our jargon, implicitly recognises the way things are at the moment, are not, at least not quite how you want them to be. So hopefully, I think this approach can, it can be applied in really serious, big situations. Well, in family life is serious and big, and like the whole child protection system, it can sort of scale up to that.
It sounds like a massive project, Guy.
Yeah, but it needs to happen, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Step by step.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And hopefully, like we said earlier, professionals and families will get in touch on the Facebook. Because I guess the more feedback you get, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, no, we'd very much invite that. That'd be great. I just can I make another plug. That's just that there's a few self-help books out there in solution focus. There are not that many. Most solution focused books are aimed at professionals and practitioners. There's a book by Raya Gull, and Raya's involved in the Solution Focus Collective. Name spelled Rayya, surname Ghul, Raya Gull. And I've got it here, The Power of the Next Small Step. And I'd recommend that book because it's beautifully written for people as opposed to for professionals. So I just, think of the thrust of this conversation and your work about helping people, use these, have these conversations and use the approach. I recommend that book as a nice way in. The Power of the Next Small Step. I think it's available on, online. Just Google it. What have you? Yeah.
Everything's online. Sorry.
Everything's online.
And the resources you mentioned earlier, Guy, on the NSPCC website, it's some really lovely worksheets there. Yeah,
no, that's very and that toolkit. There's NSPCC workers, who they used to run the service called the face-to-face service, and it was begun as a service for teenagers, young people in care or on the edge of care, but I think in care who were, and the trigger for it was young people phoning the NSPCC helpline and what counselling was available for them to be referred on to. So they developed this service and they wanted to use solution-focused practice. It was fantastic. So I did a lot of training for them. And then they sort of expanded the service to include working with younger children as well, with their foster carers or what have you. And so and I sort of did sort of help them, but the workers very much developed these lovely ideas for adapting, the sort of ladders and hills and things that we mentioned earlier for scales. But lots more than that as well, for working with younger children. And professionals and parents both would find that useful, I think.
Yeah, it's something that we certainly promote to. So we have a family-based solutions. What's it called? I've gone blank. What's that app? Where they all communicate.
What's that again?
WhatsApp. So yeah, it was something that I'm always taking bits and bobs and resources here and there from the toolkit that you helped create, and I'm posting it on there to try and encourage parents to start thinking outside the box and using them really.
Yeah. It's a very good piece of work, wasn't it? Yeah, recommended.
No, definitely. And in terms of training, Guy, and I don't want to plug you in that much because Joe and I offer training as well. But from where you are, how can people get in touch and kind of look at that?
Well, again, I've just seen my website address going underneath. Just go on the website, quickest way, guyshennan.com, and contact details are there. There's some information there lots of information on the website, information about my training. And therapy and coaching and consultation and stuff, but an email address, mobile phone number, all the contact details are there.
And I'd like to say that last year, Joe and I, with a couple of colleagues, attended your conference. We went to Bath, didn't we, Joe?
In Bath, yeah.
In Bath, and it was absolutely amazing. We were prepared to come along this year. Unfortunately, it's had to be cancelled, but. It's amazing the work that you guys do as a team.
Yeah. Well, that was Rob Black and myself and others, Mark and the Zebra Collective and Carolyn Emmanuel. It was a great team but Rob was the driving force behind it because he works at Bath Spa University, with students using solution focus, brilliant service. And so we had the grounds, the Bath Spa University, they're beautiful.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
Beautiful setting. It was a gorgeous setting.
The workshops were really good. So anyone, what I'm getting at is anyone that wants to kind of look into solution focused practices, therapy, do get in touch with us because and Guy, because there's the solution focused community is such a wonderful, giving community. And we're always out looking out for each other and looking at the best qualities and kind of expanding on them.
So the conference you mentioned, it was the UK Association of Solution Focused Practice Conference, so UK ASFP, and different people offer to host it each year. So people can look at the website there, UK ASFP.
Yeah, that's why I didn't refer to it, because I always get it.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
Because every time we try and log in, because we are members to that, so every time, what was it again? UK what?
UK. And you were right. It was a lovely couple of days. Again, some lovely people attending. It's well worth looking into this approach if you're in a supporting sort of role, because when we first started out, we were very much problem focused, and it just wore us out. Literally wore us out. Just ended up blaming and counter blaming, and it was just really stressful for everybody involved. And the word you mentioned earlier, building hope. That's the beauty of what we see anyway when families come, that there is a bit of hope, there is a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and when we can work and the versatility of this approach, because it's used in so many different areas, businesses, schools, individuals, family work. So it's very, if you're a practitioner, it's worth looking into. You've got nothing to lose by looking.
I agree with all that.
And I didn't want to kind of there's two things that we're going to end this on. It's very, very, very quickly kind of go through what the miracle day looks like. Those of you who know me know that I don't actually use the word miracle. I don't describe it as a miracle. But there's so many different ways of asking it. But also, I just wanted to tell everyone that Guy is actually one of our A-listers in the solution focused world, to Joe and I. So, when I said to Joe, guess who I contacted? Guy's going to be, coming on. He was like, really? And Guy, I don't think you realise the impact that you have on us, on people that haven't been, in the SF world for as long as you have been. And it's absolutely fantastic to have all these mentors. We've met so many fantastic people, which we regard as mentors. So I want to really, really thank you for that.
No, well, it's very kind of you, but no, it's a pleasure, and it's great to be here talking with you. Really, you're right. I agree. It's a great community, and the conferences are great, and people support each other. People offer each other stuff and resources, and it's generous, I think. Yeah.
So, what is the miracle day, guys?
But you know what? When Joe mentioned this about not blaming, I thought that was a really important comment. And because there's a couple of examples I would give of when I've asked a miracle question, because when you're working with families, and if people are talking about the problem or the problems in the family, it just almost inevitably starts to shift into blame. It's like, who's to blame for the problem? Because there's like more than one person involved because you're working with a family. And I remember, and I think I mentioned this in another plug, the preface to the book that I wrote about solution focused practice. And in the preface, I just wrote about how I started to use it bit by bit as a social worker. And there's one that I can remember, a mother and 14-year-old teenager at each other's throats, and we were in the office in Derby, in the middle of town in social services, and they're shouting, and I'm sitting there having that, and well, I'm going to try this miracle question now, and I was quite new to the approach. I thought, well, I don't know what else to do, so I said, look, can I just ask you a question, a strange question? And looked at me, and I said, okay, well, just imagine that when you wake up tomorrow morning, the two of you, and the problems have gone that you come here about. I wouldn't ask it like that now, by the way, but that's the problems have gone that you come here about. But you don't know. You don't know it's happened because this miracle happens while you're asleep tonight. So what's the first thing you'd notice tomorrow morning after you woke up? It would tell you this miracle had happened. And they both started laughing, and but not in a bad way, it was just, they just thought it was. And like a minute or two before, they'd been at each other's throat, and that's can happen. You fed up with each other and you sort of blame each other for the problem. And the miracle just took them out of that. So you just invite people into a different day. And so my first ever session, also mentioned somewhere in that book, my first ever session, after the 4-day course I did with Chris. And I've told this story many times, but it's so powerful to me. I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to go and see a family and use this approach. Having done a 4-day course, I thought, I can't wait to use this approach. I really was raring to go. And my wonderful manager, who I mentioned earlier, in the Monday morning, we had a duty meeting every morning, and sort of crisis situations had to be sort of shared out, and who's going to go and visit this family or do this. And they said, well, a parent or parents have been in touch with the department on the Friday afternoon, really struggling with one of their children. They have three children, and it was like, you have to take them into care, we can't cope, and they were just it was sort of promised the social worker would go and visit on Monday, and it was sort of like held over the weekend. That's the sort of way that we might have taught, I suppose. And so Wendy, the manager, was asking like who might go out and visit this family this morning because they've been promised to visit, and that's a situation when normally all the colleagues, we're all sort of sitting looking at our diaries. And, quite a difficult situation. And I'm like, can I? Yeah, okay. So I went out to visit this family, and I just learned the approach. So I did it as I'd been taught, and I asked each of the five people in the front room of the house, and I asked each person something like, what needs to happen for this to be useful. And these days, I would say, what are your best hopes from me visiting, from these visits? So I find out what they want, find out what their hopes are first, and then they all said something one by one. Something being better in their family. So then I said, right, and now I've got a very strange question I want to ask each of you. So can I start with you, Katie? And yeah, okay. And the sort of, I don't know, 10 or 11-year-old daughter. So I said, so just imagine that when you go to bed tonight and go to sleep, that a miracle happens. And what the miracle does is, all the things that you're hoping for from my visit, it's all happening, and so it's but you don't know it's happened because it happens while you're asleep. So what's the first thing you'd notice tomorrow morning that would tell you that this miracle had happened? So that's the miracle question. Then you help people to start describing their day, this miracle. And so Katie went on, and then after some point, she said, and then I'd have some breakfast, and I'd learned to ask this minute amount of detail. So I said, what would you have for breakfast? And she said, I'd have my mum's cereal. Okay. So what would happen next? And so I did the session, and I just felt a sense of relief. I'd done a whole solution-focused session with the family, and then I said, so that's the so should I come back and visit again? And there was a sense that they'd sort of, I don't think they'd enjoyed it, but they wanted me to come back. At least they'd sat talking with each other for an hour or so with me. So I went back maybe later that same week, and I'd been taught to ask what's better as the first question. I found that a hard question to ask. I thought, it's what's better straight away. But no, that's what I've been taught. So I went back and called it again and said, so what's better since I came on Monday? And there'd been quite a lot of improvement. And I was like, wow. I said, so how have you done that? What have you done that's helped? And one thing that Mum said was, the question you asked is about a miracle the next day. And Katie said she'd have my cereal. She said, I didn't know that she thought the muesli was just for me. So the next morning at breakfast, I said to Katie, here you are, Katie, do you want some muesli? She said, I don't know if that's... And she said, I don't know if that's got anything to do with the improvements. And I don't know either, but I sort of, as I've told that story so often, I thought, well, what's that said to Katie? That the next morning her mum says to her, do you want some muesli?
Yeah.
It's told, she's listened. So being able to describe this miracle day in a family context, everyone can hear each other miracle day, and then you can choose to act on them if you can, and you can just say, here, do you want some muesli? And then that sort of taught me that I don't know what happened the next day, but well, I might have asked them questions at the time, but it's many years ago. You can just imagine the possible reactions. Do you want some muesli? A possible smile in response. Might have been the first smile that had been seen for quite a while, and then how smiles back. And little things can just
snowball.
Well, leads to bigger outcomes, doesn't it?
So I hope that's explained what the miracle question is. The miracle day.
And it really is. You're absolutely right, because like you said, small little changes lead to bigger outcomes.
Yeah.
So I mean, just that alone they would have been smiling more.
Yeah, you remember, didn't you? And it's a very touching thing to do, to have heard that comment and then to say, "Here, do you want some music?"
Yeah, which is really sweet.
Yeah.
Well done, Guy.
Yeah.
It wasn't you, it was them.
Yeah.
And I mean, we were trained by was it Harvey and then Chris, and so we we've been to brief quite a few times, and we really appreciate that. But it's just so lovely to meet so many other practitioners, because we all work in such different ways, and it's just nice to kind of learn from each other. And Joe and I are kind of learning from each other all the time.
That's great for the team. Yeah, that was important to me in Derby, to have that team thing in terms of learning from each other.
Yeah, we're always learning. We are always learning, which is why it's really important to us, especially to take advantage of these, Zoom sessions and everything else that's going on. And I'm sitting there with my notepad going, oh yeah, I'm going to take that one. and I do tell them, like I told you, I'm taking that. But I think I was a non-believer in solution-focused practices, because we were very institutionalized, working in a school. Secondary school. So when Joe kind of invested a little bit more faith into it than I had, so when I coincidentally walked into the office and I saw Joe conducting a full session, an SF session, and I was like, whoa. And that took about 8 months. But once I had that light bulb moment, there's no going back.
That's a nice experience.
Sorry, I was just going to say, there's times when you can just pull a question out of the bag and you think, wow, that had such an impact, especially when there's a lot of bickering. And I don't know where it came from, so I just said, well, what is it about this family that tells you it's worth fighting for?
Yeah, nice.
Completely changed the whole conversation.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is that right question at the right time. Sometimes it just hits.
There's these wonderful assumptions in solution-focused questions, and like in your question then, Joe, what is it in this family that's worth fighting for? You're conveying that there is something. Simply what it is, and that's a very powerful assumption.
Well, they're there sitting in front of him, so they obviously want to see change, don't they?
Yeah, so you can make that assumption.
That's an assumption. Yeah, you can make that assumption. I think there was another one that Joe said, which I was a bit upset that I didn't come up with that myself, but I kind of stole. If you do want social services off your back, what was it?
I can't remember.
If you don't, because the parent was complaining about social services and why is the social worker calling me? So, well, what is it your social worker needs to see you doing differently in order for them not to have to be in your life anymore? And I was like, oh, come on, that's a good one. Hold on.
I don't think I probably stole that from somewhere. We're like magpies, Guy, aren't we? We go around saying, oh, that's a good one.
There's not many original questions. We all take questions from everybody else, I think.
And that's the beauty of it. But we really, really want to thank you. You are an amazing person. I can't wait to give you a proper hug rather than a virtual one. And you really have inspired us. We love all your and guys, look him up on social on YouTube.
Yeah.
Subscribe.
Yes, YouTube.
Yeah, I'm talking with Mark Gardner in some, and that's fascinating. That's a guy with loads of ideas. So we're having these conversations that we're sharing with each other and putting them on YouTube. It's a new thing.
Yeah, and I have been watching them on Facebook, and I think they're absolutely amazing. I will kind of share them a lot more than I have been, I think. But they are absolutely brilliant, very useful. So thank you so much. Guy, can I just any last words from either one of you before I pull the plug?
Well, just thank you to you two for the invitation and for having this conversation and inviting me to it. It's been really enjoyable, and yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Just wanted to say, obviously, thank you for giving up your time on this again gorgeous day, and just your enthusiasm, mate. It's infectious. It's been I've really enjoyed it. It's been what, an hour and 10 minutes. It doesn't feel like that at all. So thank you for that. It's really I appreciate it a lot.
Absolute pleasure. Okay,
So
all the best.
Thank you, Guy. But Guy, can I just ask you to hang on for a minute? Don't press any buttons. Don't touch your laptop.
Oh, my hands up.
No.
Yeah, because I don't trust you, Joe. But thank you to everyone else, and I will be downloading it onto YouTube and plugging everything that we've spoken about today. So thank you very much to Guy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.